Hello, family. This video is about generational curses. I decided to make this video because I believe it's important to share a little bit more background of my family, specifically my parents and my grandparents, how they were raised. And here it goes. So, as I mentioned in my testimony video, which I will attach a little icon at the end of this video so you can go listen to it if you haven't already. Um, my parents met. My father was in the service, and my mom met him in church, and they got married. They had myself and my brother, and ultimately it ended in divorce. They had great intentions, uh, middle class family, vacations. My father played golf and bowling. He did a lot of sports because he wasn't able to do that as a kid. I just recently found that out because I thought it was interesting that my father and my uncle would play baseball and do a lot of activities as adults, but it was because they didn't have the opportunity to do it when they were younger. And so we had what one would think is the perfect family. However, my mother, she was in foster care as when she was a baby. My grandmother got pregnant young, and she wasn't able to continue taking care of my mother. DCF was called on her because she was having difficulty. My great grandfather refused to let her stay with him and help. Um, my grandmother also refused to let my grandfather's family help her. Matter of fact, she would always make excuses about where my mother was when they would ask for her. My mother's father was in the service, so his family was really trying to reach out and just say, where's our grandbaby? We want to see her. And so, as I was mentioning, my mother was put into foster care because my grandmother was unable to take care of her. My mother went through a lot of abuse at the homes that she was in. One instance, she was put in a well on a farm because of whatever it was. No child should be put in a well. But this woman ultimately was convicted of crimes against children, and my mother was removed from her care. Ultimately, my mother moved with another family that she would remain with until my parents got married. That family was not the best family. It was already clear that my mother was there for was a paycheck, um, secondhand clothes, not the favorite foster child. Other foster children would benefit from things, and my mother wouldn't, just because they didn't care for my mother. Moving forward, my grandmother started to get herself together. She would come and visit my mother as my mother's older sister. She I don't understand that. Why she would lie to my mother. But she did. She told my mother that she was her older sister rather than her mother. She would basically belittle my mother about the condition of how she looked, her clothing, which my mother had no control over. So it hurt. It hurt my mother a lot, that her older sister would belittle her, talk to her about why doesn't she look better, or matter of fact, where are the clothes that I bought you from the last time? Well, those clothes were thrown out because the foster family didn't like my grandmother. Moving forward, as my mother was getting older, she realized that it's her mother, and my grandmother ended up getting married and having two children. My mother's still in foster care. She never came and got my mother. She left her there. She made the excuse that her husband, thank you, Holy Spirit, that her husband was the one that didn't want my mother to live with her, with the family. So my mother would go and visit her brothers and spend time with them and have to go home. And my mom would go back to foster care, her foster home, thinking, wow, this man doesn't like me. And in fact, we know that that wasn't the case. My grandmother didn't want people to know that she had a child out of wedlock. So she kept her hidden. My grandfather would send money for my mother. Well, at least he thought he was sending money. One of his siblings was taking that money and spending it, so she never got it. My great grandfather finally found out, because my grandmother was honest about where my mom was, that she was in foster care. He was very upset about this because he could have helped, but he wasn't allowed to because my grandmother lied. Moving forward, the relationship that I had with my grandmother was very toxic. This woman to me didn't like women. She didn't like my mom. As an adult, when my mom got older, she would always nitpick about how my brother and I looked, and appearances were big for her. And so her favorite was my brother. I can remember being little. Well, how come you have these tight clothes on her? I could always remember something negative from her. And so she would spend more time with my brother, take him with her, just, yeah, that's how she behaved. And it was difficult for my mom, as an adult, but she still accepted her into her life, as it was. That was the best that it was going to be. My mom wasn't really around my grandfather. As I mentioned, he was in the service. Um, I can't remember the details, but I know that he was beaten badly, by some other servicemen, and he was dishonorably discharged, which caused him to end up being, in a lot of pain constantly, and he became an addict. So he really wasn't around my mom much until I can remember years later, maybe 3 or 4 years before he passed away. My mother and him rekindled and were able to, create a bond. I met him and spent time with him. So that's the situation that was going on with my mom's side. One thing I'm leaving out: my mother was also molested, and she didn't speak on it, but she was molested, and that also affected her. So we have child abuse, neglect, we have molestation, abandonment, so many different things going on there. And so, am I disappointed that she didn't listen to me when I explained to her that I had been molested? Absolutely. Do I forgive her? Absolutely. It happened, and I'm healing. I'm healing in still some aspects. I'm healed from it. Mind you, this man has 3 children of his own, and it still baffles me that he would do that to someone else's child. But I'm going to keep moving forward. So that's my mother's side of the family. My father's side of the family. My father grew up with 5 children. He was the second in line, and his mom, she did her best. My grandparents were married. She did her best. She tried to work and take care of these children. I don't remember hearing many stories about their relationship, when they were married. Most of it was, um, negative things. Like, she would go after my grandfather for child support. And I remember he moved across the country, with one of his brothers to avoid it, to avoid getting in trouble for not paying child support. I remember I never met my grandfather, but I know he and my grandmother initially had a close relationship. My grandmother struggled a lot. She had, mental illness, and I don't know. I'm under the impression she might even had abandonment issues. I don't know her history. I met her, but I don't know, a lot except for what my father shared with me, that they had a rough time. They lived in poor conditions. Sometimes there wasn't enough to eat. Holy shoes, clothes too small. Um, Abuse by, a few uncles. My father was very fair skinned, and, my grandmother's father did not like that. He didn't like him, and he told him, he's like, "You're too light. I can't take you out with me." So my father would get left behind purposely because of that. There was an uncle that ended up throwing my father out the window. Now he's little, and it's on the ground floor, but still, you threw the child out the window. My father was fine, but he remembers these things. It's still traumatizing, and, I believe no, I don't believe. I know that it affected my father. I remember he still talks to this day about how no one was there to help him, no one was there to lead him, no one was there to help him with his homework. Just abandonment for my dad, neglect in some ways. And I try to put myself in my grandmother's shoes, um, because I know she was dealing with a lot. And I know my mom's mother was dealing with a lot. But I know my grandmother was dealing with a lot with these. I'm trying to imagine her with these five children and mental illness and trying to take care of herself. I can't imagine how she was able to get through, but she did. She wasn't perfect. My grandmother on my mom's side wasn't perfect. Nobody's perfect. But these were the things that they were facing. My father's grandmother had a second grade education. She had, I believe they had seven children, including my grandmother. And her husband, the one that didn't like my father, he worked for the railroad, so he also drank a lot. And so this is what my father was mostly around. As far as my um, father's family, there were 13 children, and his grandparents were married. He said he didn't spend a lot of time with them. He spent time with them, but it was mostly with my grandmother's side of the family. Um, so that's kind of a snippet of what I wanted to share. Once again, I'm not making excuses for what happened to me. I just want to share with you that we should look at people not just on the surface, but their background or what we know about them. People don't just act out for no reason. They're dealing with stuff inside that hasn't been addressed, or they may not be able to, they don't know where to begin to address it, or they want to deny that there's stuff going on inside, and they deflect, and they point the finger at everybody else but themselves. They may not like themselves, so it's easier for them to um, talk about other people, be mean to other people. That makes them feel better. That's their comfort zone. Um, they'll ignore different things, important facts about abuse. They'll look the other way. Well, that person can handle it. Now, again, I'm speaking in general. In general now, we deal with things in different ways. For me, I know when my son was younger, his father was in jail. I left that part out of my testimony. His father was in jail, and he got out of jail. I started working his second shift, and so he was responsible for taking care of our son. And come to find out, he was hitting him. And my son went and told the school, and next thing I know, I had DCF at my doorstep. And I was like, nope, this didn't, I was in denial. This didn't happen. No, this didn't happen. I was more so concerned about keeping this man in the house than my son um, being abused. Ultimately, it got addressed. Um, my son went into counseling. I went into counseling with him. And when I say it got addressed, his father stopped and we moved forward. However, I wanted to ignore it. I wanted to ignore what my son was saying. I didn't want to believe him. And I know for a fact there are many children out there, including myself, that have said things to ask for help, to say, hey, something's wrong here. And we haven't listened. Parents haven't listened to them. Or they accuse the child of the one being at fault. You must have did something wrong. Or you must have provoked. You did something. So even I'm guilty of ignoring my son's cries about being abused. And he's an adult now. We still talk about not that specifically, but different circumstances, different things that have happened. And I've had conversations with him in regards to how I was wrong and how I understand now why I made those bad decisions, why I didn't listen to him. I've asked him for forgiveness. We have deep conversations about this and many other things. But I think about the families that don't, where it's just left under the carpet, nothing's discussed, nothing's addressed. It's just like, oh, okay, that happened, but we're just going to forget about it. The child doesn't forget about it. What do you do with that? What do you do with that pain of being abused and it's not getting addressed? With when I was abused, I remember when I was molested, I remember that caused sexual feelings in me. Yeah, sexual feelings in me. I remember even finding porn in the house, and that just it just made it worse. It just made me, I'm like, now I'm having these feelings. What do I do with them? I didn't go to counseling. I didn't have anyone to talk about this stuff with. I didn't. I had to figure it out on my own, like a lot of other people. And it also caused me to start having sex early. I remember the person that I had sex with didn't even know I was a virgin. I completely played it off like I had had sex before, but I hadn't. And when I did that, completely got my heart broken and just opened up a new can of worms of trauma. Um, when I wish if I had that opportunity to talk to somebody about what I was feeling, what I was dealing with, maybe I wouldn't have went down that road. I don't know. It is what it is. The good thing is that I was able to address it and I'm in a good space. The good thing is I was able to address what my son went through and he and I are in a good space. I wasn't able to address much with my grandmother on my mom's side. She and I had a few arguments because I was just sick of her. I'm being completely honest. As a child, I was sick of her. I would go with her, and she would just constantly badger me. And anything good, she would always find a way to mess it up. She would always take me to plays in New York on Broadway, like Annie, and to see the Rockettes. And she would always want to buy me new clothes, but it'd be clothes that she picked out. I had no decision on it, even down to the shoes. And I just remember begging her, can I please pick out my shoes? No, no. So I look like a 12-year-old, but a 12-year-old child physically dressed as an 8-year-old, the way I was dressed, getting on the subway and in the New York cab. And I was like, this is not right. This is not right. But she will always find a way to just make a happy or a good situation bad. And I had mentioned before that she would, pick on me about my appearance. And I would always come home to my mom just depleted and upset. And my mother would have to pick up the phone and call her and say, why are you doing this? And so, like I said, I started to realize she doesn't do this to my brother. She does this to me. She has a problem with females. And I don't get it. Um, that's really what I wanted to share. To me, after I've shared this, I don't think that it makes much sense, but I'm following what the Most High God has asked me to do. He asked me to share some background on my family to give you an inside look of what we how we acted, how what not how we acted, but things that we faced and how that could impact our decision making. And I'm sure that you have your own stories. I'm sure that you have your own experiences that you've been through. I'm sure you know someone that's had experiences as well. I'm sure you know that there have been different directions that people have went in, good and bad, and some have healed, some have not. Some people are still carrying trauma around with them and don't realize that a lot of this stuff is passed down to us generation after generation after generation. And so when I mentioned to you that I don't want my children to go through the things that I went through, granted my oldest son has, but that doesn't mean it's not too late for me to change. It doesn't mean it's not too late for me to instill the right behavior in my younger children and be an example to my oldest son. It doesn't mean that I can't fight for my grandchildren and their children to not have the same experiences that I had or my son had. It's never too late. The Most High God can do the impossible, and I'm trusting and I believe that. I'm a walking example of that. Excuse me. So even though the enemy's trying to tell me that this doesn't make sense, don't post this, delete this video right now, I'm just gonna go with it. And I also feel like I was all over the place with my information, but I'm going to post this video regardless because I know there's at least one person out there that this resonated with, that this is going to help in some way, or they're going to know someone that needed to hear what I said. what what I'd like to end with is, and I mentioned this again in the testimony video about your purpose, you have to follow what the Most High says, even if you're getting those negative thoughts in your head, or if people are telling you, don't do this, don't do that. You have to follow through on what the Most High says, because He knows exactly how this is going to turn out. He knows exactly who this is going to help. And the same with your purpose and what your assignments are. He knows the end result of those assignments, but He needs us to complete them. He needs us to do our part. It's important. Let Him use you. And don't worry about the outcome of what it may look like to you. Just know that the Most High sees the bigger picture. Have faith and trust in that. Know that this is for somebody and it's going to help. And whether you're writing books, whether you're singing, whatever your assignment is. And so we made it under 30 minutes. So if you made it this long, I appreciate you. I love you. I pray that you enter into a relationship with the Most High if you're not in one. And if you are in one, that you continue to seek Him always, trust and believe in Him. Same for those who aren't in a relationship with Him. Just give that relationship a chance. You'll be like, why didn't I do this sooner? You will be rewarded in so many ways. You'll be healed and you will find your peace. So that's all for now. Love and blessings on you.